What's going on, Dynasty Land? Welcome back
That's
to
how
the
we're starting
channel.
Dynasty Land.
Bunkbed breakdowns with their boy and Noah. I don't even know what to call Noah anymore, man. He's evolved past Rafa hair. I don't know what type of hair is rocking these days, but it's totally new, and we're in unventured territory. But
They're gonna say and improved, but that was left out, so now I'm a little self-conscious to start the video.
Yeah, Noah, how's it going, man?
It's going all right. I mean, the little dig at my hair, we'll run through it like Javonte Williams. School's starting real soon. By the time you're watching this, I'm already failing my classes, so that's going to not hamper the production of these videos. It's probably going to actually improve the production of these videos because I'm going to put off my schoolwork to improve the editing and stuff like that. So that should be fun. But it's still like 40 degrees here. The weather still stinks, so I could say I'm having a good time, but really I'm not.
No one's having a good time, man. It's still fucking COVID, but we find solace in Dynasty offseason during COVID. There's a lot to go over. Last week, Noah and I put out the first round of a mock draft, super early rookie 2021 rookie class, super flex mock draft. Today, we're gonna carry you into the money zone, and the money zone for me this year really is that second round. We're not gonna have the Underwear Olympics, so the Underwear Olympics hype season sell cycle will be a little bit more wane. We're probably going to see 20 people report sub 4.2 40 times now that they're just running in their own basement on the treadmill. So it's going to be exciting. I mean, it's going to be fun because the regular process has to change. People usually do their film grinding, do their data grinding, and then like the combine comes, they take the combine, put it into their fancy model, and then spit out an R squared, and then they wait for the draft, and they take the draft capital, put in their model, spit out a fancy R squared. That shit's all going up in the, you're going to take that and toss it out the window now because we have no combine. The NFL has made it official, as some of us expected, but you're going to have to take a different approach to how you analyze athleticism, right? It's not going to be based on bench press and running around pylons. It's going to be based on, what you guys see on film. What we see. There's some cool data analytics tools out there that measure in-game speed. How fast are these players running? Are they hitting 23 miles per hour? Et cetera, et cetera. So there's going to be a very different approach. And I think really, like most years, second round is kind of where you make that money, right? Because that's when you make the correct decision. You're either a Keyshawn Vaughn drafter or you're a T Higgins drafter in the second round, right? So you got to make sure that you fall in on the right side of history to make sure you hit the biggest wins you can in those second rounds. So we're going to try and guide you through our thoughts in the second round based on what we know today. Now it's going to evolve, it's going to change, and I always mock drafts because I think a lot of times they're a waste of time. But this will give you guys some insight into what we think about some of these players. We'll talk a little bit of the talent. Probably won't dive too deep because Noah and I will do a bunch of similar to last year. We'll do like some deep dive videos where he'll break down the film, I'll break down the numbers, we'll do some cut ups, we'll do some hot edits, and then spit that out on the YouTube channel later on. So we'll just kind of go a quick overview. Noah, should we run through, I guess, the first round first?
Yeah.
Or is there something else we got to do before that?
Yeah, I was gonna say instead of the first round, I think we got to hit the intro. All right, so for the first round, we did it last week. If you didn't tune in, go tune in, but I'm going to save you about an hour and 15 minutes. We had 101, forgot the guy's fucking name, Trevor Lawrence, and then from there we go Najee Harris, Justin Fields, Javonte Williams, Jamar Chase, Travis Etienne, Trey Lance, Zach Wilson, Rashad Bateman, Devonta Smith, Kyle Pitts, Jaylen Waddle. And Mike, I know you put up a video this past Monday going through your rankings. Are there any big movers within that first round? I know you had ETN jumping Javonte. Would he move up to your 104 ahead of Chase for you, or would both running backs fall behind Chase?
I mean, it's gonna depend there, I guess, on my team. It's gonna flip back and forth. Like right now, I kind of have it Jamar Chase up front, but just depending on where they go and where they land, that's a very fluid group right there between Najee, Jamar, Travis, Etienne, and Javonte Williams, and honestly, even fluid, including Trey Lance and Zach Wilson, because we kind of talked about last week where they could land. Really can impact a lot of things.
All right, for sure. And then we'll kick off round two with a guy who barely missed round one. I think Mike and I both had him in our top 12, but because we had other guys, I'm not sure how the math worked out. He didn't end up being in our top 12. We got Rondale Moore. Not going to go too in depth on him because we did cover him a little bit last week. He broke out as a freshman, gets hurt his second year, comes back. He's got David Bell to produce on the other side of him, still goes out and produces. The fact that he came back after a long absence showed what we like to see out of him, the athleticism, the fact that he's like 5'9" and like 200,000 pounds. He's built like an absolute unit. He's like a modern day Steve Smith, and I think a more modern comparison in terms of not just size, because this guy's bigger than Deebo Samuel, but I think the way that he's going to be used a lot behind the line of scrimmage. Like this year, Deebo Samuel had like -7 air yards, but like 600 receiving yards total because he's so good after the catch. I think Rondale Moore in the NFL, obviously, is not going to land with a guy like Kyle Shanahan, but first round capital, second round capital, I think whoever's going to take him will know how to use him. And in that role will be somebody that's being used not out of the backfield as a running back, but behind the line of scrimmage in the screen game, short over the middle, intermediate type of routes to be used after the catch because he breaks a whole lot of tackles. He is, he's like a little fucking jukebox in the open field. He just runs everybody over. He runs through people. He runs around people. And although he might be like a little bit shorter and although he's not like an expansive route tree type of guy, I think what he's good at, he's elite at. And because of that, the NFL is moving more towards yak guys. I think he fits towards what the NFL is moving towards now. And he can be a perfectly fine wide receiver 2 in an offense. And because of that, become like a fantasy wide receiver 2 that doesn't need 100 receptions to turn in that type of performance. Can be a guy who gets like 60 receptions for 1,000 yards and a handful of touchdowns. And with his skill set, like he doesn't need, as I said, like he doesn't need a whole lot of touches to be able to produce extremely heavily. So for me, he's my 201. And I think both of us would be pretty comfortable taking him in the first round.
Yeah, I mean, Rondale Moore, he has an elite analytical profile. He broke out at the tender age of 18.2, and he didn't just break out in the traditional sense where people use like a 20% dominator. He broke out in a big way. He stepped on the field and immediately achieved a 30% dominator, which is really hard to do in this class. There's only 3 people that did that. Rondale Moore, Rashad Bateman, who we already took in the prior round, and unknown guy to me who I'm looking into more so now is Jaden Reed. But the two guys you really want to care about that are probably going to get more of the draft capitals are Rashad Bateman and Rondale Moore. So elite breakout profile. He kind of fell down people's ranks as he got hurt in his second year. He was well on his way to just absolutely blowing it up again in his second year. But, getting hurt kind of like dinged them there a little bit. But don't forget about Rondale Moore. He also won the Paul Hornung Award, which is like given to the nation's most versatile player. Prior winners of that include Odell Beckham. So, good players, good company to be in, good profile, elite profile. The only reason why he's slipped a little bit in my rankings, I've been hearing more, from the NFL insiders, guys like Lance Zierlein, that like he might not get like high end draft capital. So that's the only reason why he's moved down a little bit in my ranks. But like if he goes in the first round, he's going to be a top target of mine going forward.
I can't wait for Kyle Shanahan to go from drafting Pettis, replacing him with Deebo, replacing Deebo with Brandon Ayuk, and then replacing Brandon Ayuk with Rondale Moore. It would just be like the perfect thing. And then you got to sell him after year 1 because then we know Kyle Shanahan's going to draft some bum in 2022 that's going to outproduce him.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll follow up that pick there with my guy who I've been just pounding the table for nonstop, and that's Dyami Brown. He plays for UNC, catches passes from Sam Howell, one of the top QB prospects of the 2022 class. He's not a true freshman breakout, but he broke out. When he broke out huge as well. Similar to Rondale, instead of just going for that simple 20% dominator breakout, he immediately jumped into the 30% tier and maintained that throughout his junior season. He had 30% of market share of receiving yards when he was 19 years old, and then 34% in the most latest junior season. He is absolutely an alpha dog, and what I like about him is not just the numbers, but when you look at him, I mean, he's a burner, man. He is a downfield threat, and we can see like that's kind of where, the NFL like wants to go. People are trying to catch up with what the Chiefs are building on offense. And I just think he would fit so perfectly as like a wide receiver 2 on a lot of teams, right? He's kind of like that. I think Fusu put out this comp, and I absolutely loved it. But he's kind of like Will Fuller, and you drop him in on a Green Bay, right? You drop him in on Chiefs, who only have Tyreek Hill signed right now, so that I could easily see them taking a wide receiver in this very deep class. They can grab Dyami Brown in the late second, maybe early third round, and he would become what McCole Hardman never could. So I really
That's
love
tough,
Dyami
Mike.
Brown.
That was a real like ricochet shot of McCole Hardman.
I really like Dyami Brown, and I think I'm interested to see where you come out on the film side of him. But he's an absolute baller to me, and I think having lost Justin Ross from this class early on, I think Dyami Brown really stepped in and filled those shoes because this guy is a deep down the field threat, and he's got some arrogant hands too, man. He makes some pretty baller ass catches.
Yeah, he does have arrogant hands. I was actually looking into the numbers, and I think he has like 16 drops over these past 2 years on like 132 catchable targets, which isn't great. But at the same time, like he's made, I know it's a cop out to say, oh, he's made it this far in his career. He's going to be like a first or second round pick in the NFL draft. His hands are fine. We see guys plenty of times drop a ton of passes. Hopefully that's something he can clean up. That is just like one knock that people have on him. But beyond that, right, like he's somebody who I really think could run high 4.3s, like 4.38, 4.39, or low 4.4s type of 40 time. And you brought up the Will Fuller comparison. I think Will Fuller's a little bit different in the sense that like this year it looked like he put on some weight and looked like a true number one receiver. I'm not so sure Brown is going to be able to do that the next level, but what he does remind me of no relation is a guy like John Brown, who is, a little bit slighter of a frame, can work over the middle, but that's not necessarily where he makes his bread. It's more so on like the double moves or the deep plays and just a really good overall receiver when it comes down to being a deep threat. If you went to the Bills and replaced a John Brown in an offense that wants to throw as much as they do with Brian Dable likely coming back and, Brown getting older and then Dyami Brown coming in and taking over the reins, I would love him to play opposite with Stephon Diggs and just stretch the field there. But I do have him a little bit lower than where you have him, but it's to me pretty landing spot dependent. If he does land in a Green Bay, if he does land in a Buffalo Bill type of situation, he could easily rise up my boards because, as you said, he has the analytical profile and he has the skill set and the athleticism that is required to turn in good fantasy production. Another guy who doesn't need 100 receptions a year to be able to be, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 type of guy. And in the second round, if you can get a wide receiver 3 year after year, it might sound like that's a bust type of a pick, but how many chances are you going to get at that? Like the 8th wide receiver off the board is going to be that productive for you. So the fact that this is a super flex draft and the fact that Mac Jones is still on the board makes me be like, okay, I kind of got to take you. To me, he's extremely similar to what we saw out of Joe Burrow last year. Like Joe Burrow came from Ohio State, kind of came out of nowhere, was not so great as a junior at LSU. Senior season, 60 touchdowns, won the national championship, had like the best offense we've ever seen. But then this guy, Mac Jones, comes out of nowhere and has another awesome offense, one of the better ones we've ever seen this year. And, obviously he had Jaylen Waddle and he had Henry Ruggs and he had Jerry Jeudy and he had Devonta Smith last year and they have Najee Harris out of the backfield. And he was pretty good when Tua went down. But then this year, like all he really had was Devonta Smith and Najee Harris. Jaylen Waddle missed a whole bunch of games. He only played 4, then he got injured and he came back towards the end. They had like She Loves Michi on the outside. They have a bunch of other guys. Like they had some tight end. I forgot his last name. I think he was number 89, but he was built like a tiny receiver. So I don't know how he was a tight end. Basically, what I'm getting at is he had an extremely efficient and extremely productive year at the quarterback position, despite not being in the best situation in terms of weapons surrounding him. And when you compare his numbers to Joe Burrow, when it comes down to like yards per attempt, touchdown percentage, interception percentage, they're all extremely, extremely similar. The one difference is Mac Jones is not a running threat. Joe Burrow wasn't like the running threat that a Trevor Lawrence or Justin Fields is, but he definitely has legs and he's mobile. Mac Jones is a little bit more stagnant, but he showed the arm talent, he showed the accuracy throughout the season. And I think if you can get a guy who's likely going to be a top 20, top 15 pick in the actual NFL draft with a legit path to touches, like if he goes, not path to touches, but path to a job. If he goes to Washington, he's the best quarterback on the roster. If he goes to Carolina, he's the best quarterback on the roster. If he goes to San Francisco, he's the best quarterback on the roster. I wouldn't be surprised if he's somebody who is starting not only to start the season, but like even halfway through the season. And if you can get a starting quarterback in, the early part of the second round in a super flex draft that has the type of pedigree that Mac Jones has, the chances of you returning value on that pick are probably really high. Instead of taking like the RB5 in this class or the wide receiver 9 in this class or the tight end 2 in this class, just take like the quarterback 6, because even a guy like Dwayne Haskins, you could sell him for more than you probably acquired him for, unless you were ridiculous and picked him at like the 103 in that draft. So although he's not like a sexy pick because he isn't a Konami code type of quarterback, I think the arm talent that he has will make him a decent enough quarterback too. Like his ceiling could probably be a Kirk Cousins. And although that's not too high, like you'll pay a first round pick for Kirk Cousins if you don't have a quarterback in super flex leagues. So to get 22, 23-year-old Kirk Cousins, if that's his ceiling at this point of the draft, I think is pretty much a steal.
Yeah, actually, that was a mistake. I mean, I totally forgot about Mac Jones. I should have actually taken him first. I mean, honestly, if Mac Jones goes in top 15, you can't really let him follow the first round. So we probably have to squeeze him ahead of some of these wide receivers because the value and the flip value of him starting is too high. I would absolutely take him ahead of a Dyami Brown. I'm just I'm not really generally not excited about non-Konami quarterbacks. That's why he's like falling a little bit lower for than me. But if he gets the draft capital, he will absolutely move up and slide up in there. So yeah, I totally missed on that one, but makes sense to get Mac Jones there. I think before we move on real quick, I think one thing I forgot to mention was one big mover in my ranks is Jaylen Waddle. So I think prior I didn't have him in my top 5 wide receivers. I think he's pretty solidly in there right now, and it's gonna come counterintuitive because obviously I'm a numbers driven guy, and most of my analysis is like analytics driven. Whether they broke out, age driven.
Come on,
In
Mike. Say
this,
you've been watching film. Say you've been
yeah.
watching
In
them.
this scenario, I think I'm just gonna make a contextual exception because even though Jaylen Waddle technically didn't break out, he was smashing this year, and he absolutely would have broke out this year. I think if he stayed healthy, and he would have broke out like in a pretty big way in his junior year. Which is still a big red flag that he didn't took this long to break out. But if you look at his freshman year, and a lot of people will probably compare him to Henry Ruggs, right? Because neither of them could break out. Both of them are really fast players. But I think, one of the big differences here is one, Jaylen Waddle would have broken out this year, but two, Jaylen Waddle like achieved in a freshman year like 17% of the market share of receiving yards, and that's like basically as high as Henry Ruggs ever got in his entire career. So they're not really similar outside of speed. I find them to be not very similar players
The
at
thing about
all.
Henry Ruggs too is like coming out last year, like, oh, he's extremely versatile. He can be
Yeah,
returning punts and kicks. Like he never really did that. Jaylen Waddle has done that, and Jaylen
yeah.
Waddle has produced, unlike Henry Ruggs.
Yeah, and Jalen Waddle, he's just way more like twitchy and like way faster and able to like stop and go within short areas, which means that he's going to be able to navigate tight spaces a lot better. And I'm not some freaking wide receiver expert, but I think he's also a bit stronger off the line than someone like a Henry Ruggs. He's got a few more moves than a Henry Ruggs does because Henry Ruggs, like I said, the NFL cornerback puts his arms and puts his hands on him, and his route is basically over. It
You
ends
not
right
know how
there.
fast I am? Back up, please
Yeah,
back up.
yeah. Whereas like Jalen Waddle actually has a couple moves, so I'm a big fan of Jalen Waddle, and I'm gonna probably be a lot higher on him than most analytical people will be. He is in my top 5 wide receivers because one, I think he's definitely gonna get that draft capital, but two, numbers and all be damned. I think he's just a really fucking good player. So, based on my very novice film grinder eyes, I'm gonna be pretty high on Jalen Waddle. I'm gonna try and attack him and grab him late in the first in a couple of drafts. And I might even grab him ahead of like a Dyami Brown, for example, because I know draft capital will be there. So yeah, that's one thing I wanted to bring up. He was a big riser for me because before I had him in the mid second, and right now he's definitely in the first round.
Yeah, I think he's my wide receiver 5 behind Bateman, Chase, Devonta Smith, and then he might be right. It might be he's 4 for me. Him and like Bateman, him and Rondale Moore are extremely close for me, just because I think they bring a lot of similar things to the table. Obviously, the analytical profile is there for Moore, but at the same time, like Jaylen Waddle, it's kind of hard to have a young breakout age when you're surrounded by that many first round talents. And the fact that he was like consistent in his production, like his sophomore year, dipped a little bit, but his freshman year was awesome. This past year, he was awesome before injury. I just think that watching him play and seeing the skill set he has, it's going to translate to the next level. He's going to get first or second round draft capital. I think it's going to translate to a good fantasy producer.
Yeah, he could absolutely be the first wide receiver off the board, even without the NFL Combine. People already know how freaking fast this kid is, and I have him ahead of Devonta Smith. So that
Cool.
there's a hot take for you guys if you want one.
All right,
All
who
right.
do you got the 204, Mike?
At the 204, so Mac Jones off the board. So normally here I would go with my guy Seth Williams. So I've been a big fan of Seth Williams for a while, but recently I'm like getting more and more concerned because like it seems like nobody thinks he's gonna get draft capital. He might be like a day 3 pick, and if he's a day 3 pick, there's no way in hell I'm gonna take him over like some of these other guys that might have more draft capital. Someone like a Terrace Marshall, someone like a Amon-Ra St. Brown or something. I'm gonna take him here so I can just kind of cover why I do like him. He is that prototypical alpha receiver. He's got big ass size, but he's not refined, right? And that's gonna be the knock that everyone has on him, is that he isn't very refined. He's also a bit of a older prospect, even though he technically broke out in his freshman year. He was like already like 19 years old or something like that, and then carrying over. He's going to be older than some of the other prospects, but he's huge, man. And the reason why he doesn't get much attention is because he does play with Bo Nix, who freaking stinks. Like Bo Nix is just bad. It's like it's bad. He's awful. It's kind of like similar situation to Jalen Reagor in terms of like the type of quarterback play that he was dealing with. But what I've been learning more and more from speaking with some of the film folks out there is Seth Williams really struggles which is surprising given his size because he's a beast, right? He is a towering beast, but he does struggle when faced with like physical press. So obviously, that's a problem in the NFL. I don't care if you run like crisp routes, but if you kind of fold when people get physical with you, a la N'Keal Harry, you're not really going to find that type of success. So I'm concerned with him, but my main concern still is draft capital. If he does get drafted, some of those concerns will be alleviated. Before, I firmly had him in my top 5, but after just considering some of the stuff and just learning from some of the film side, I've kind of moved him down a little bit, and I've had Jaylen Waddle and Dyami Brown, both of them kind of leap ahead of him. So he's kind of just falling a bit below, but I do still love the talent, and based on my novice little eyes, I do like what I see, man. Like he makes some incredible freaking catches, like just catches that people shouldn't be making and people wouldn't make because that's how bad Bo Nix is. Seth Williams goes out there and makes some of those catches. So he's got a lot of weaknesses, he's got a lot of holes, and he's a developmental project, but if you're chasing the upside, man, I feel like Seth Williams is one of those guys that can absolutely hit on that upside.
Yeah, he reminds me a lot of Mike Williams if Mike Williams wasn't perpetually surrounded by Randy Orton, slithering, giving him an RKO every time he catches the ball. He's like the same size. He has that vertical ability, and by vertical, I mean like jumping ability. Great hands. I know he has dropped a bunch of passes. Like that's another knock on him is his drop rate. But kind of like what I said with Jalen Reagor last year, like if you can make a bunch, and I know it's not like a great comparison after the rookie season he had, but if you make a bunch of contested catches and you bail out your quarterback as much as you do, and you show the body control that you show in the red zone and deep down the field, like not so much that I'm not worried about the hands, but I think it's something that can be fixed. It's not like he has bad hands because he's making catches that, as you said, nobody should be able to make. And, I haven't looked too deep into him being able to deal with physical press coverage. Obviously, if that is a knock against him, that's not going to be great because another thing he lacks in is yards after catch. He's not a great, he's not a burner or elusive in the open field, although he does try to hurdle people every single time he catches the ball. So if he's not really getting off the press all too much and you can't really manufacture him touches because he can't gain yards after the catch, then that's definitely going to be a concern of mine for him. But like a Mike Williams, kind of like a younger Alshon Jeffrey, when you have that size and you have maybe that speed, I mean, we can't test it right now because the combine's probably not going to happen. And maybe those softwares that can tell me he runs 21 miles an hour make me a little more confident. But with that size and speed, if he becomes a little bit more physical and uses his frame to his advantage, I think not the pinnacle like a Mike Evans has reached, but I think a very similar skill set where you're just a big guy who, although you don't run a 4.4, you get open downfield because you know how to stack a cornerback, you know how to use your body, and you know how to use leverage. I think he can play that sort of role in the NFL, but if he can't get over physical press coverage and he's not the fastest guy in the world, then he's most likely going to dud out, especially if the draft capital is there and the coaching system does not, or the coaching staff doesn't want to give him multiple chances. Now, another guy who is an absolute unit on the field. He has moved up my rankings a whole lot. My 205. Mike, do you know a man by the name of Rhamondre Stevenson?
Yeah. Yeah. He moved up in my
Love
rankings
this
too.
guy. Eddie Lacy 2.0, 6 feet tall, 246 pounds, but he looks like a goddamn ballerina out there. He made Trey Sermon move up north because he was so damn good coming out of JUCO, going to Oklahoma. Now, there are some concerns, right? Number one, he went to JUCO. He didn't do too much his junior year because he was sharing a backfield. And then he broke out his senior year. I'm sure senior year breakouts for running backs don't really fucking matter. But he's going to be a little bit older. He's going to be 23 years old as a rookie. And the other concern is he might be Elijah Holyfield. He might run a 4.7. He might run a 4.8. But if he runs anything like 4.65 or lower at that size, I do not care. This guy is so nimble. He is so quick for being that big. There's so many times you watch him on the goal line, he gets absolutely smashed, and then he just does a little twirl and falls into the end zone. He's going to be a goal line back. He's somebody who can catch the ball out of the backfield. And then just looking at what he does, his in-depth numbers in terms of yards after contact per attempt, 3.9, ranked 4th in the class behind only Javonte Williams, Khalil Herbert, and Jaret Patterson. Jaret Patterson plays at Buffalo, so he plays garbage-ass schools. Khalil Herbert plays at Virginia Tech, I believe, so they play a little bit better competition. So does Javonte Williams. He plays at UNC. And then beyond that, 33.7% broken tackle rate, ranks only behind Javonte Williams. So he's extremely slippery. He's extremely elusive. And you could say, oh, he falls into the mold of a Zach Moss, a guy who can play all three downs, is a fatter guy and isn't too fast. I think the difference is like he uses his size. Like he's not afraid to run into somebody, truck him, and keep going. He's not going to break off any 90-yard touchdown runs. But what he is going to do is slip through tackles, get the hard-earned yards if the draft capital is there at all, which I honestly don't know because he only had like one big year at Oklahoma in a weird season hampered by COVID where they played like 6 games, but he's averaging over 100 rushing yards a game and 3 receptions a game. If he gets day 1 or day 2 capital, man, he's going to be hard to keep out of the first round. I don't know. I love watching him play. And then I looked at his numbers when he was at JUCO. I'm like, in 11 games, this guy had 2,111 rushing yards, 9.5 yards a carry, and he was actually breaking off like 80-yard touchdown runs. I don't get it. JUCO obviously doesn't have the same level of competition, but I think the skill set he brings to the table, as long as he is not a complete fat slug and like runs a 5-second 40, I'm going to be all in on him. I am all in on the fat running backs in 2021.
I like that. He moved up. I talked about him on the Mark Watch Mondays episode as well, and he's interesting because he does provide that 3-down skill set, and he's a sneakily good receiver, based on what I saw. And he did kick Trey Sermon upstairs. It's gonna come down to draft capital. Like I have no idea where he's gonna get drafted. Like what I fear is like this is one of those cases where like it's like a Twitter darling, like a Twitter.
I love
fantasy.
him more than any 32
Yeah.
teams in the NFL do.
Yeah, like Twitter like loves him. Like I don't want to be in another like Tyler Johnson scenario. I think that's what scares me about him. But like if they announce his name on day 2, we will be very, very excited, and he will definitely shoot up because, as you said, like he does not move like a guy that weighs in at 250 pounds. He moves pretty well for someone that size, and you have to move well from that size if you are going to be a receiver. And as we saw, like AJ Dillon, not a receiver. So Rhamondre Stevenson is definitely a huge back, and he could be pretty interesting. I like that pick. I think it's probably a bit too early for me. Just there's a couple more guys on the board here. This is a zone where I tend to really favor wide receivers over running backs because like the class is really deep, and we do have a lot more good profiles to go through. So that's kind of where I'm at, but I do like the pick. I mean, if I were to pick a running back, like he's definitely up there in consideration for me. So I'm going to move on here, and I'm going to take, there's a couple names that I like here, but I'm going to land on Amon-Ra St. Brown. So Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC, someone, if you guys, the name sounds familiar, it's because his brother, Equanimeous St. Brown, plays for the Green Bay Packers. You wouldn't know it because he hasn't really done anything his entire
Use
career.
the word plays very loosely there, Mike.
Yeah. But this is the brother. There's a trio. I think there's a trio of brothers. This is a trio or duo of brothers, and obviously Equanimeous St. Brown is not the best one out of all of them. Amon-Ra St. Brown is. He broke out as a true freshman at USC, continued to produce in his sophomore year, and then went pretty ham this year on the TD side, which really helped his dominator. But if you look at his market share of receiving yards instead of the full dominator, which includes TDs, it doesn't look as good, but he still has a pretty damn good profile. So he's someone that I'm interested in here. I think getting him in the second round could be a steal, right? He could be someone where we look back and we're like, damn, how the hell did he fall into the second round? Because he progressed really well. I mean, he broke out as a true freshman and, with 26% of the team's receiving yards, and then had a little bit of a flat year as a sophomore, 25%, and then shot back up to about 30% in this year. And, he's someone that, USC has provided some really, really good talent out of the wide receiver position, right? If you look back, you look at Robert Woods, you look at Juju Smith-Schuster, Amon-Ra St. Brown's got the size and physicality to kind of play in the NFL, and I like his game, man. I like his game. I liked him last year more than I liked Michael Pittman. He was a big reason why I didn't like Michael Pittman as much because Amon-Ra St. Brown was there handling the business. And with Michael Pittman gone, he kind of continued to just ball out. So big fan of Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think he will get draft capital. So I'm not as concerned about draft capital for him. I think he will go like somewhere in day 2, probably in the second round, if I had to guess. And if he goes there, gets draft capital with his profile, with his skill set, I'm pretty excited, man. I think he's someone that is actually pretty good with the ball in his hands.
Yeah, he kind of birthed the egregiously titled YouTube highlight mixes. I remember last year, Nick and I were going through like the coldest receiver ever, the best receiver to ever play football in the history of football. Like his, I'm looking at it right now, his high school mixtape, most savage, all caps, high school wide receiver ever. Like, chill out. Like, he's a high school receiver. I can be that savage. But building off what you said, right? As a true freshman, competing with Michael Pittman Jr., had 8 less yards than him as a freshman. Sophomore year didn't progress as we'd like to see, but that year they were also feeding Michael Pittman Jr. like the ball every single play, and he was a senior. So obviously, if you have a guy who's like 6'5" and pretty fast in a not so great Pac-12, you're gonna want to feed him the ball over a sophomore. Obviously, that's not like great in Amon-Ra St. Brown's favor, that type of argument. But I do think the fact that this year he showed out in the touchdown department and not only being like a deep threat or not only being a yak guy, but also showing he can produce in the red zone. He had a 4 touchdown game where like all his plays were just like selling a slant, going to a fade, faking a fade, going for a slant. Like he's very polished is what I'd say. And being polished as a junior is a lot better than being polished as a senior. He's a little bit younger than what seniors would be, obviously because he's a junior. And just watching him play, it's like hard. I
Let
like
me
to
check
make
that. Let me check
comps.
that math on there.
Yeah, let me
Juniors
check the
younger
math.
than
Junior, less
seniors.
than senior age. Okay.
Checks out.
So
Checks out.
it checked out. And I like to throw out comps just to like help you guys know like what type of player they are. And it was kind of hard to think of one for him. He's like 6'1", 6', 6'1", whatever, like 195 pounds. And it's not perfect, but I think a Jarvis Landry type of players who I think he could be at the NFL.
Mm.
Somebody who is not the fastest out there, somebody who is not the best at high pointing the ball, but is extremely efficient in the routes. They're not dancing at the line to get open. They're just quick off the line, very efficient, getting open, good hands, able to work after the catch, and just an overall really good receiver. So I like him as well. And I also think there's a chance like the Chargers take him because the Chargers do not leave like their vicinity when scouting players. Like they drafted fucking Joshua Kelly because he went to UCLA and they just brought in that dumbass DC who's probably gonna be good just to prove me wrong because he coached or he was the defense coordinator for the Rams. So he might go to the Chargers. That might hurt him a little bit because he's like an extremely discounted Keenan Allen, but I like him as well. And Mike, I know you said there's a wealth of receivers at this point. It's hard for me to pass on this next guy on the board. I know you want me to take Terrace Marshall. I know you want all these other guys. I'm going with Kenneth Gainwell because my comp for him isn't Austin Eckler. But beyond that, right, as a redshirt freshman, and you said in Mark about Watch Mondays, he is the reason why Antonio Gibson wasn't a full-time running back. This guy was absolutely incredible. 2,000 yards from scrimmage and 16 touchdowns, sharing the field with Gibson. And obviously, if you're at Memphis, like I could go to Memphis and rush for 1,600 yards. Like their offensive system for the running back is ridiculous. And that's no slight on my skill set because I'm a fucking great running back standing at like 6'7". But I do think that the skill set he brings to the table isn't one where if he's not drafted to be a starting running back, it's going to hamper him because he's a true pass catcher out of the backfield. Now, having a scat back go at the 206 or whatever we're at, or 207 right now, might not be the smartest decision, but you know, he's 5'10, 195 pounds. He's not the smallest guy in the world. And I think kind of like a Tony Pollard is like one injury away from potentially being a lead back. And if he gets the draft capital, you know, all it's going to take is a running back's contract running out or an injury for him to fully show that he can be a 3-down back. Obviously, he didn't play this year and he only has 1 year of production, but I think the fact that he can be used out of the backfield as a Swiss Army knife, both between the tackles, both as a receiving option in the NFL, moving more towards a system where you know, you don't need to be a full-on workhorse to produce in fantasy like an Austin Eckler, even when he was backing up Melvin Gordon was good for fantasy. I think what he brings to the table is somebody who has legit upside to catch like 50, 60 passes and also handle a good bulk of carries on the ground and turn in running back 2 seasons. And at this point in the draft, I think taking a guy like Kenneth Gainwell this year is a little bit more safe than drafting what we did last year in like a Keyshawn Vaughn, who is more of a one-dimensional type of guy. So although there are some good receivers on the board, I think the upside of a Gainwell with his breakaway ability and his dual threat skill set is where I lean at this point.
Yeah, I love that pick, by the way. I talked about Kenneth Gainwell, and he's a very interesting case because is he a good football player? If you have eyes, you can see that he is, right? And if you have brains, you could see that he is because he relegated really good football players to the bench. So I really like Kenneth Gainwell. My main concern, which I aired before, is like I don't know like where he's gonna land, right? Like if he lands in a place where he has a shot to lead a committee and to get work on the ground, I'm like super excited because I think he's someone that's talented enough to do that. But if he lands in like a Tennessee Titans, kind of like a Darrington Evans did last year, I'm immediately not excited because I don't like PPR backs, and he's small enough where like I could see a team pigeonholing him into like that type of role. But he could like excel where he could excel is like kind of like start in that type of role, kind of like Austin Eckler did, but then also prove that he's a really, really good running back on the ground too. So I'm
Hope
excited
Denver
to
takes
see.
him just so Melvin Gordon loses his job to another offense.
Yeah, yeah. I hope. I think that'd be cool too. And I mean, there's a couple of decent spots that he can go to. I'm really interested by Kenneth Gainwell. But having went there, you made my decision very very easy. And I mentioned his name already, but it's going to be Terrace Marshall. Terrace Marshall is someone that I was actually interested before this season. He was a very very highly recruited prospect, and obviously it's really hard to kind of produce when you're playing with the new rookie receiving yards holder in the NFL. Plus, by my view, the tier one and by far and away the best wide receiver prospect of this class in Jermar Chase and Justin Jefferson. But he wasn't a bum. Like he actually produced in the LSU offense. He put up like 17% market share of receiving yards, and then this year when the team took a dumpster fire. I mean, that LSU offense, we asked like, oh, is it the offense? Is it the scheme? Is it the players? I mean, turns out it's freaking everything, right? But this year he broke out, 20 put up 25% of market share of the receiving yards. But more importantly, I mean, he looked good, man. He looked good. He was lethal in the red zone, catching TDs as well, 43% of the team's touchdowns. So basically, I mean, almost half of the team's passing touchdown scoring came through Terrace Marshall. And, just looking at him play from a film perspective, he's a baller, man. I mean, he's tall, he's big enough to kind of play on the outside. He's a little bit, I guess, lanky. I guess is that the right word?
Yeah, a
Yeah,
gangly, long
yeah,
arms.
he's a little bit gangly. I mean, he's tall. He's 6'3", 200. Like not to like scout the helmet, but like from that perspective, he's kind of like a DJ Chark in that sense, where like they're both really tall, lanky receivers, like that absolutely can threaten you downfield. But I think he's someone that NFL teams are really going to like, and I think he's someone that's going to have pretty secure draft capital. So if you are drafting me for the NFL draft, and given we're not having NFL combines, I think he's a pretty interesting prospect. And I know some people that have him like very very high, like in their top 5. So I think getting someone like a Terrace Marshall in the second round is pretty exciting to someone like me.
Yeah, I was reading up on him. He actually moved from like a 73% outside receiver last year to I think a 69% slot receiver this year. So kind of like
Nice.
Justin, very nice. Kind of like Justin Jefferson went from outside to inside. People are going to say he's only a slot receiver because that's what he did this year, despite last year being good on the outside. To me, when I watch him, like it just seems like he's good at everything. He's not like elite at any one thing. He's not an elite route runner. He doesn't have like any elite, yards after catch ability. He's just really good at everything. Now, I want to draw the comp to an Adam Thielen. That's just because like his size and his build and the fact that he can win both deep and over the middle. But obviously he's not the type of route runner that Thielen is. But if you just imagine the build that Thielen has and the hands that he has and how reliable he is as a receiver and the versatility he has in the inside and the outside, I think that's kind of a skill set he can bring to the table. Obviously, producing at LSU and showing he can produce despite Joe Burrow being gone and Joe Brady going on will probably play well in NFL circles. He might fall to like the end of the first round or be picked at the end of the first round or second round just because of that. Played in the SEC and produced there. So I do like that pick. He's a little bit lower for me for like stupid reasons. I'm just like, when I watch him, like nothing extreme like pops off extremely off the tape. Whereas a guy like who I have above him, who I'm not going to pick right now, but like a Tylan Wallace, I think is just like a little bit more electric. So that's kind of how I make my rankings. So that's what you're listening to right now. But I'm going to move on from another wide receiver to a running back at the 209. I got Trey Sermon. He is somebody who I'm like, because I do think he could be a workhorse in the NFL given his size. But as you said, with a Rhamondre Stevenson, as you said with a Kenneth Gainwell, it all comes down to draft capital, all comes down to landing spot. Like he could land on, I'm not like obviously like the Giants probably aren't going to take him, or like the Panthers with CMC there, but like a team that has a legit starting running back, if he goes there, just throw him in the garbage. Because to me, like he's a good running back, right? He ranks pretty highly in like elusive rating and broken tackles. But when I watch him play, he looks like Tim Duncan. He's like mad stiff out there. Like he's got a rod going up his back and like he just can't move laterally. He does run through people and he's got pretty good size at 6'1", 215. Can catch passes out of the backfield, but again, like nothing really pops off the tape when I watch him play. He did produce extremely well this year at Ohio State. Then again, he is playing at Ohio State, benefiting from playing with Justin Fields. And you look throughout his career, the quarterbacks he's played with are Baker Mayfield, Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray, and Justin Fields, three of which are extremely mobile quarterbacks. So that probably could have helped him as well. So there are some red flags in the fact that, he moves around like my grandpa, and the fact that he has played in very good offensive systems. But then there's also a little bit of a saving grace in the fact that he's probably going to have draft capital because he produced at Ohio State and he has the size. And NFL coaches are like, they look at the scale. Oh, you're over 210 pounds. I'm going to throw you out there as my running back one. So he does have that going for him. Again, it all depends on draft capital and landing spot. But if he lands on a team like the Seattle Seahawks and Chris Carson is gone, I'm fine taking him here. If he lands in like San Francisco or if he lands in Green Bay and they get rid of Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams, I'll be like, fine, I'll take him. But I'm not in love with the talent by any means. I don't think he is anywhere near the best running back in this class. I think he's well within tier 2, maybe even tier 3. But the draft capital's there, the landing spot's there. It's kind of hard to pass on him this late in the second round.
Yeah, Trey Sermon is interesting, right? Because he's been in a committee the entire time. He like never really took over a backfield, with the exception of like the small sample of a few weeks where he did look pretty damn good, and then he got hurt and didn't play the national championship game. So, but he was a pretty highly sought after guy before, and then I know people were really excited about him transitioning over to OSU to kind of take over the roles. Sorry, not take over the roles, but take over the reins and kind of go from there. But I don't know about him, man. I don't know what to do with him. Like, I'll take him ahead of like a Chuba Hubbard because like now that we're not having an NFL combine, like I'm not interested in Chuba Hubbard anymore.
Yeah, everybody's gonna run the same 40 as Chuba Hubbard now. There's no upside.
Yeah, exactly. So there's no upside to him. But I'm not really jumping on him. I actually have another running back ahead of Trey Sermon. But I'm not gonna go to running back. I'm gonna go again, dip back into the wide receiver well, and there's a couple of choices here. But I think what I'm gonna do is go with Tamorrion Terry, and
Love
he's
that. I almost
someone.
put him on my list too. He's somebody who fell just shy of the second round, but I love this guy.
Yeah, he's a beast. I really would have liked to see him come out last year, but I understand why he went back. Like, we all know how bad Florida State is. Cam Akers getting the draft capital and producing the way he did come out of that freaking cesspool is a miracle. But Tamorrion Terry, he put up some baller numbers too. As a the problem with him is like he's a bit older, right? He's going to be a 20. Is he going to be 23 or 22?
Yeah, 23. I looked at his age right before this. He was born in 98.
Yeah, exactly. He's going to be a 23-year-old, even though he only played 3 years at Florida State, and he actually like basically opted out like midway through the season, I think. But he put up some monster seasons there as a 20-year-old, 25% dominator. So that was his like freshman year, I guess. And then as a 21-year-old redshirt, he put on 36% market share of receiving yards. So he was an absolute monster producer at Florida State, and he's massive. He is huge, but he can freaking blaze. He is incredibly fast for his size. So that's what kind of makes him intriguing, is not that he's fast, but he's incredibly fast and for his size. And I think that's interesting because he also produced. If he was just big and fast and produced, I wouldn't be interested at all, right? But he is big and fast, but he also was quite productive. And the dude looks like a freaking baller, man. Like, I don't know how much tape you've watched on Terry, but I remember when I was watching him last season, I was like, man, I really, really freaking hope this guy declares, because I think he's going to be a freaking steal in the second round of rookie drafts. Unfortunately, he didn't declare. He went back for another year, but he is declaring now. So, and I think, in the late second, I think that's absolutely worth a bullet to fire for someone like him. If he gets a draft pedigree, I think he can go like, somewhere in the late day too, which would make him pretty interesting.
Yeah, he's like 6'4", 215. I honestly, obviously the combine isn't happening. I wouldn't have been surprised if he ran like a 4.40 flat. This guy
Yeah.
absolutely burns. And it's not like he's only a deep threat. I know he was used there a lot, but there's like Twitter clips circling around where he catches the ball in the perimeter and just like cuts it upfield. Like his one cut ability for a guy that size and that straight line speed, you wouldn't expect that agility, but he's got it in spades. And it's kind of hard to say to fade somebody with his type of profile just because of what we've seen recently in DK Metcalf and in Chase Claypool. Like Chase Claypool's a guy both of us did not like because his analytical profile wasn't there, and I just wasn't convinced he was anything other than a tight end. Turns out when you're like 6'4", 230, you can run as fast as he does. Like teams will find a way to get you the ball. Tamorrion Terry isn't built the same way. Like he's not as brolic as a Chase Claypool or a DK Metcalf, but the speed is definitely there. The size is there. The hands are there. Maybe he didn't really want to play for Florida State. I don't blame him. He opted out. And last year was a complete dumpster fire. But as a freshman, as you said, like he was a bit older, but he did produce. I think he was second on the team in receiving yards, but just slightly. But he led the team in touchdowns. And they haven't had like any sort of quarterback play since like DeAndre Francois thought he was a quarterback, and like before that, Jameis Winston. So he has struggled a lot by playing in a terrible system. But beyond that, he's a size speed freak. We're not going to see it fully tested out, but I'm sure you can go on Twitter and see people say, oh, look, he ran 22.73 miles an hour on this play. That's really fucking fast for a guy his size. So I'm on board with that pick. Now, I think this is the 211, and I could pick Kyle Trask. I would throw up my mouth if I did that, so I'm not going to pick Kyle Trask. I could pick Chuba Hubbard, but again, I would vomit again. So I'm going to go with his college teammate from Oklahoma State, my boy, Tylan Smoochie Wallace. This guy, I love him. I remember in 2019, I wrote about him as a potential top 5 wide receiver in the 2020 class. Then he tears his ACL in 2020 and redeclares for 2021. So he didn't come out as a junior. He's coming out as a senior. But I think, again, like when you put context behind it, the guy tore his ACL. He wanted to prove he still had it. He was maybe falling down draft boards because of that injury. But he's basically averaged over 100 yards, 100 receiving yards a game since his sophomore year, which is when he broke out. He had like 1,400 yards that year, and he's an absolute menace. Obviously, Oklahoma State produces elite receivers every single year because of that offensive system and the conference that they're in. But just watching him play, right, he's somebody who wins deep down the field. But beyond that, he is somebody who breaks a whole lot of tackles. In 2019, 11 broken tackles on 53 receptions, which may not seem like a lot, but that's a 20.8% rate. Comparing that to the 2 wide receivers at LSU that year, Chase was much higher at 27.4%, but Justin Jefferson was at 11.7%. So he's somewhere in between. He's a great yak receiver. He also has the size at like 6 foot or 6'1", 190 pounds. So if you can win deep down the field, if you can win after the catch, you're a decent enough route runner, and he has extremely good hands. Like he's mossing people week in and week out, and only had 1 drop on 67 catchable targets. I mean, he's really polished. He's got it all there. I think the only downside to him is, I guess, twofold. 1, he played in the Big 12 and they don't really face all too many tough defenses. And 2, he's coming out in his senior year. But, he's going to be 22 years old as a rookie. It's not like he's a fossil. And I think the skill set he has is one that, the NFL is going to like. My comp for him might be a little bit disrespectful to this guy, given where he was coming out of college. But I think like a modern day Sammy Watkins, if he was healthy, somebody who can win deep down the field and somebody who's physical at the catch point and pick up yards after the catch. I think that's what he can bring to the table in the NFL. He's not a Deebo Samuel. He's not a Rondale Moore. He's not one of these guys who's going to be used out of the backfield as a gadget, but he's just, in my opinion, just a really sound, overall, really good receiver. And for me, that's good enough for me to take him at the 211. And I think last year, if he was coming out as a junior in that class, he'd probably be a fringy top 5 wide receiver. So you're getting a discount by him going back for his senior year.
Yeah, I love Tylan Wallace last year. I was sad that he didn't declare, but it made sense, right? Because he got hurt, and that's kind of what happened. He ended up getting hurt. He couldn't finish the season. I think he blew out his ACL or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So he went back to his senior season. And when he did go back, here's the thing, right? When you see players go back, they have to absolutely like just dominate and blow it out of the water. And that's kind of what he did, right? He went back his senior year. Went from 30% market share receiving yards to 40%. So he took that next step up. He went from 34% dominator to 43% dominator. And like you said, in his sophomore season, when he broke out, it was not a normal breakout. It was a huge, huge breakout. I mean, 38% market share of receiving yards and 38% total dominator rating. So he was a great profile. And, the concern is there, like you said, it's Big 12, but you know who else coming to Big 12? CeeDee Lamb, right? So sometimes there's good wide receivers do come out there. My concern with them, probably just draft capital, man. I mean, like anytime someone goes back, that is my concern. It's like the NFL, that's a signal to me that the NFL said, yo, you're not good enough to get drafted where you want to get drafted in like the early rounds. So, but if he gets drafted, it's a lot more interesting. And I think that, Tylan Wallace, man, I mean, we're not going to see him test either, but he's got some pretty good athleticism. So, unlike some of the other wide receivers that we touted from the Big 12 last year, I can't remember their names, but he's got the profile. I think he's pretty athletic, and he's going to get some decent draft capital. So, at the late second round pick, you could definitely do worse at wide receiver.
Yeah, I think I actually saw somewhere that he put up like a 40-inch vertical or like a 39.5, and the coaches were like, watch out when this guy tests. He's going to run a 4.4 and have a 40-inch vertical. Obviously, if you're a coach of a guy, you're not going to say, yeah, he has a 28-inch vertical and he runs a 4.7. You want to hype him up a bit, but like when you watch him play, he definitely has that in his bag where he can high point a ball and he can also burn defenders. So yeah, if the combine was there, he probably would have been somebody that ranked or jumped up draft boards because of his performance in underwear.
All right. So what is it? Is it the last pick
Last
now
pick.
for me?
Do it wisely, Mike. No, for everybody. It's at 212 right now.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So 212. Look, there's an interesting decision to be made here. And I think I'm gonna go either with running backs because I've been going wide receiver so heavy. I do want to kind of talk a little bit about one of these running backs and someone that I think could be a value that you're getting in the late second and early third. If you guys watch the Market Watch Monday, you probably know who it is, and it's Jermar Jefferson from Oregon. He's an interesting prospect. I mean, he like as a freshman balled. He balled as a freshman. And then, people kind of forgot about him in his sophomore year, and he came back this year and kind of just like picked up where he left off. You're not going to see it in the counting stats because he only played 6 games this year, right? Compared to his freshman year where he played like 12 games. But in those 6 games, he looked electric. He is a capable receiver as well, which is something I look for. And then he's got the size, man. He's like 5'10", 215, 220 pounds. So he can kind of carry that workload depending on where he lands. It's really just going to come down to, like we always say, like draft capital. And for the running backs in this area, chances are you're probably not going to have day 2 draft capital, right? You're looking at guys who are getting day 3 draft capital. Hopefully they get drafted in like the 4th round and they're going to go into a committee, maybe even like a backup role, but potentially can work their way up. Something like a Tony Pollard, for example, right? Someone I was interested in when he got drafted there. I don't know if you've watched any Jermar Jefferson.
No, I
But
watched maybe like one highlight reel. I'm like, I'm not getting too much out of a highlight reel. Maybe I should watch the tape. And then I'm like, I'm not going to watch tape of Jermar Jefferson. So I haven't looked too deep into him yet.
Yeah, so he's an interesting prospect. I think you guys should take a look at him. I'm taking him here ahead of Chuba Hubbard, which is, maybe that's a little bit too hot takey. But, like I said, Chuba Hubbard, the one thing he had going from is that track speed. And if he doesn't get to put on full display in the national stage at an NFL combine, and given how bad of a year he had, I'm just not so sure where he goes in the draft. And, my comp for Chuba Hubbard is Tevin Coleman. And if you guys know anything about me, I've never wanted Tevin Coleman in any team, any year, ever. I've never wanted him. And I've always said to fade him because he's not very good.
I think the only person that's ever wanted him is Kyle Shanahan. And even he doesn't really want him.
Yeah, exactly. Kyle Shanahan tried to want him, tried to play him, didn't work out because he wasn't that good. So I think Jermar Jefferson is an interesting prospect, and a lot of like some of the film guys I respect, they're pretty high on him as well, which gives me a little bit of comfort there. But at this stage, you're kind of throwing those darts, right? When you get to late second, when people say a class is deep, we're not talking like, 3rd round, 4th round deep. We're talking like, it goes well into the 2nd round. And kind of here is you're kind of just going for whoever it is that you kind of like. And it's good for me. It's between Jermar Jefferson. If I hadn't taken him, if I hadn't gone on this wide receiver drafting spree like I did, I probably would consider someone like an Elijah Moore, who actually has a really, really top end analytical profile. Wide receiver, plays for Ole Miss. Probably will be like more so in that slot role. He is a bit on the smaller side. I think he's like maybe
he's
like
5'9", 185. So he's like kind of big, but he's also small at the same time.
Yeah, he's maybe a little bit thicker, but he's a little bit tiny. So, he's another interesting prospect. Really, really great analytical profile. But, from what I've learned in the past, you can't just rely on analytics. And I haven't really seen too much positives from the film community in terms of like what he does and puts out on film. But if you look at the just pure numbers, he broke out huge as a 19-year-old, 38.4% mark share of receiving yards. And then this year crossed the 40% mark, which is very, very high end. And then on the dominator side, similarly as well. So he's an interesting prospect. And I think he's someone that I'll be looking to target in the early 3rd, like late 2nd round range. So those are 2 players that I'm kind of looking for in that range.
Yeah, and Lane Kiffin was at Ole Miss this year, and like he just draws up every play for a small guy to score a touchdown. So he did benefit heavily off of that. He's somebody who was on my top 12 list in the 2nd round that didn't end up making it. There was 2 other guys like Chuba Hubbard, as you said. He reminds you of Tevin Coleman. He reminds me of like Philip Lindsay. Like he's extremely fast, but you got to get him the hole, and you got to get him to hit the hole for him to have any sort of production. He did catch a lot of passes early in his career, but he is not a pass catcher in any sense of the imagination. Another guy was Kyle Trask. Again, he's like a very discounted version of Mac Jones. He's not going to run the ball for you at all. But unlike Mac Jones, I feel like he doesn't have the same arm as him. He kind of got exposed in their bowl game. I know Kyle Pitts wasn't playing, and I'm not sure if Kadarius Toney was playing either. But when you get exposed like that, it definitely doesn't help your draft stock if he falls like the 2nd round. Chalk him up as like Drew Lock 2.0 without the arm. He's like what Phillip Rivers is right now. Sure, he could be like the quarterback 24 in a season, but nobody's really biting at the quarterback 24 in a season. And then a few other guys, like I don't really look into tight ends too much because I don't necessarily want to draft them, but like Pat Freiermuth or Freiermuth, however you pronounce it, and like Brevin Jordan, they're supposed to be good. I don't know much about them. If you want to look into them, go at it. I'm pretty sure like people on Twitter, on YouTube are posting it. Not to say that we won't cover them, but right now I don't know too much about them. Brevin Jordan went to Miami, so he's probably going to produce because every Miami tight end produces. And Pat F, because I don't know how to pronounce his last name, went to Penn State, and we saw what Mike Gesicki can do. He catches the ball and falls down, so maybe he'll be much of the same. A few other names, Jaret Patterson out of Buffalo had like that 8 touchdown game. I'm pretty sure he's like a jag. Like he's just a smaller guy, like a small, thick guy that doesn't pop off the tape. And one guy I kind of liked watching on film was Khalil Herbert. He transferred from, I believe, Kansas to Virginia Tech this year. Nothing crazy. No numbers were crazy, but I just watching him play. I know this is like lame to say, but I'm like, oh, he looked like he had good bursts. So take that for what it is. I think he's a decent enough player that if he gets like day 2 capital, which I doubt he will, day 2 capital, I'll probably move him, high 3rd round. But as it is right now, he's just like a speculative like 4th round pick as it stands. But that's like all the guys that I had in contention for the 2nd round for me.
Cool. Yeah, I think that kind of wraps it up. Do you want to just repeat for the listeners out there who the 12 were?
All right, I don't necessarily remember the order, but I know we went Rondale Moore 1st. I think Dyami Brown 2nd, Mac Jones 3rd. I forgot who you went. I think Seth Williams, then Rhamondre Stevenson. I forget after that. I think there will be timestamps in the description, so if you want to check them out, then you can find out the order. But I went through like 5 off the top of my head, which I think is pretty impressive for a kid that can barely count to 7.
Yeah, I think it was like Rhamondre Stevenson. After that, I went Amon-Ra St. Brown, right?
I went Gainwell.
And then you went Gainwell, and then I went Terrace Marshall, and then you went
Sermon,
and then I went who is it? Tamorrion Terry, and then you went Tylan Wallace, and then I wrapped it up with Jermar Jefferson / Elijah Moore. So there you have it. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you did enjoy, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Helps us more than you know. Make sure you hit the thumbs up to help us counter the thumbs down Autobot trolls that kind of hit the channel. And then, we'll be back at you again. We'll kind of like, I think, now that the NFL Combine isn't really happening, we probably won't do like a mock draft update specifically for that. Maybe we'll just do like an update a couple months from now just to see if like opinions change, and then we'll kind of like do a same update after the draft, so we know where people have landed, and kind of give you an update there on the first 2 rounds. But just stick around, man. I mean, I think Noah and I are gonna start working on some like individual profile videos similar to what we did last year and update those, upload those to the channel. I think those were pretty helpful, even for me to do, but also I think the viewers kind of enjoyed it, so we'll be sure to put those out.
My favorite part too is we did the Antonio Gibson one, and the thumbnail was like, "Is Antonio Gibson the next David Johnson?" And you'll see a comment, it's like 7 months ago, "What are you crazy? Didn't do anything." And then I'm like 2 weeks ago, "This guy's awesome. I can't believe you called this." Like it just shows that like the progression of people's takes throughout the offseason.
Yeah, it's pretty jokes, and I mean, a lot of those videos, I mean, we definitely had our misses for sure, but we had like the Cam Akers call in there. We had like the J.K. Dobbins. It's pretty interesting because Noah will give you that insight onto the film grinding side, and then I'll try and give you a little bit of insight on the number side, and then we kind of collide and see where we have them both. And typically the best hits that we've had so far are ones where like Noah likes the film and I like the analytics, with the exception of Jalen Rager, that is. So peace out to him. But other than that, that's all we got for you guys. Make sure you tune in again next week for another episode.